For 300,000 years, every human who ever lived woke up in the morning without an alarm, without a schedule, without anywhere they had to be. Most people think that life without structure meant life was harder, more desperate, more caught up in that basic fight to stay alive than anything we know now. No, not quite. When scientists studied the last remaining communities still living close to that original human lifestyle, they found something that changed the way scientists understood prehistoric life completely. And the more you study the evidence, the more an uncomfortable realization begins to dawn about the life most modern people are living at present. Here's the number to get it all started. Modern humans spend about 90,000 hours of their lives working. That is about a third of your total awake time spent on a schedule, on a job, on time that belongs to someone else. It seems normal because everyone else is doing it, but normal and natural are not the same word, and in this case, they are not even close to being the same thing. For 99% of human history, there were no jobs, no pay, no ladder to climb, no sense that your time was something someone else could purchase. Most of the structuring of your waking life is, in the full context of human existence, an extraordinarily recent invention. And the evidence accumulated in archaeology, anthropology, and biology in the last few decades points to a conclusion most people are not prepared to accept. Your ancestors were not exhausted, desperate, or struggling constantly. In most of the ways that really matter to human well-being, they were living better than you are. And the proof of that is not philosophic. It is written right into their bones. In 1963, the anthropologist Richard Lee traveled to Botswana to study one of the last remaining communities living close to pre-agricultural human existence. He was just trying to write down what daily life was like before there was farming and jobs. What he found out became one of the most cited and most quietly ignored findings in the history of anthropology. In the community studied by Lee, adults spent about 2.5 days per week getting food, so that works out to about 17 hours. The rest of the time was theirs to do as they wished. And that is what makes this not dismissible as coincidence in one group in one location. The same pattern appears wherever researchers have looked. The Hadza of Tanzania, the H of Paraguay, the Martu of Australia, and totally different environments, different continents, different food sources available. All groups that anthropologists studied living close to original human lifestyle give the same result: survival activities 15 to 20 hours per week. To put this in perspective, the average modern worker spends 40 to 50 hours a week on employment alone, not factoring in commute or the mental weight of managing a modern life. Some people push back right away with a reasonable objection. These are people of the modern era, not ancient times. How do we really know that humans 50,000 years ago experienced the same? It is a fair question, and it has a specific answer, independent of observation of living communities or interpretation. It depends on something that cannot be rewritten or misremembered. It depends on what ancient human bodies left behind after they died, and what the remains tell us about how hard those people were really working in life. When archaeologists compare the skeletal remains of early hunter-gatherers with the skeletal remains of early agriculturalists, they see such differences between the two groups that researchers can tell which group a skeleton came from without any other information about its context. The bodies themselves record the lives they lived with a precision that no written account can match. The skeletons of early hunter-gatherers are always taller than those of ancient farmers. They have higher bone density. The joints are a lot less worn. They had no dentistry of any sort, but their teeth, far fewer cavities than the teeth of the farming populations who came after them. And the average measures of nutritional health seen in the bones of hunter-gatherers are quite a bit better than what we see in the skeletons of people who made the transition to agriculture. But skeletons from early farming tell the opposite story. They are shorter, a sign of nutritional stress in childhood. Spines and joints have repetitive strain damage from years of doing the same physical movements with no variation. Their teeth are damaged by grain-heavy diets, and the evidence is consistent that early farmers died younger than the hunter-gatherers who preceded them. This is at odds with the assumption most people have about prehistoric life, that constant struggle and physical hardship were the defining features of human existence before civilization came along to make things better. The skeletal record tells another story. The bodies of ancient hunter-gatherers show less cumulative physical damage than the bodies of the people who replaced their lifestyle with something we historically call progress. But the most telling evidence is not even from bones. It comes out of something archaeologists kept finding inside ancient sites that shouldn't have been there if survival was taking up most of the time and energy humans had. It is the work of art made tens of thousands of years ago by people who, if the old assumption is to be believed, should have been far too busy keeping themselves alive to make anything beautiful. In 1994, explorers found a cave in southern France that had been sealed for thousands of years. Inside were paintings made about 30,000 years ago. Not crude outlines or simple marks, but carefully detailed compositions of horses, lions, and rhinoceroses, executed with perspective, shading, and a clear knowledge of the way animal bodies move. Whoever made these images was doing something with skill, which took a lot of practice to develop and a lot of time to make. In South Africa, shell beads from 100,000 years ago have been found by archaeologists. Each shell was drilled with tiny holes using stone tools, obviously so they could be strung and worn. The closest coast from which those shells could be collected is about 20 kilometers away, so that someone walked a 40-kilometer round trip just to get raw material for jewelry, and then spent more hours carefully drilling each piece by hand. That process had nothing to do with survival. It was all about beauty and meaning. In Germany, researchers discovered a flute carved from a vulture bone, about 40,000 years old, with 5 equally spaced finger holes. Whoever made it knew enough about musical pitch to construct an instrument which would deliberately produce it. It was made by people who cared enough about music to spend some real time developing the means to make it. These are not isolated discoveries. In Europe, Africa, and Asia, archaeological sites repeatedly turn up objects that involve hours of skilled, focused labor with no immediate survival payoff. Ornate tools that were much more ornate than they had to be. Figures carved. Ground pigments for use on cave walls. The picture that emerges isn't of people clinging to survival desperately. It's for people with enough time and enough stability to go deep in creativity, craft, and the simple human need to make things worth making. When you put together all the data that anthropologists, archaeologists, and sleep researchers have gathered over decades of research, you can reconstruct what a typical ancient human day was really like. And what most people notice first is how laid back the whole thing appears in comparison to the life most of us are living right now. You wake up at dawn without an alarm clock because your body is in tune with the light. Last night's fire still smolders with embers and someone adds wood. Breakfast is whatever remains from the day before, eaten socially while people talk and loosely discuss what might happen. No one has an agenda or a deadline. Mornings are when the group reconnects, and the group is social, so the chat exists. In the mid-morning, a small group may go off to hunt or gather, but not every day. More likely, if any food is left over from the last hunt, the activity is making or maintaining something useful. Sharpening tools, preparing hides, fixing gear. These are activities that have no clock, no supervisor, and no external pressure telling them when they are to be finished. By early afternoon, the productive part of the day is pretty much over. Then comes something that modern people really have a hard time processing, because it has no true counterpart in modern life. People have guilt-free rest. They sit together and talk. There is no purpose to the talk. They play with the kids. They groom each other, building social bonds that, in a world without money or contracts, are literally the difference between surviving a bad season and not surviving a bad season. Anthropologist James Woodburn observed that in the hunter-gatherer societies he studied, adults enjoyed around 6 hours a day of pure social time. Not working, not sleeping, just being there with other people, because the point of being alive was instinctively understood to be human connection. About 10,000 years ago, in an area known as the Fertile Crescent, some groups of humans began to intentionally plant seeds and control the breeding of animals. At first glance, agriculture seems like an obvious upgrade. More dependable food, less dependence on wild sources, the ability to feed more people from a smaller area of land. That sounds like just the sort of development that would make human life easier and safer. Instead, the skeletal record tells you what it actually produced. Early farming populations were shorter, sicker, more nutritionally compromised, and had shorter lives than the hunter-gatherers they replaced. Their days were longer, their tasks more repetitive and physical, their diets less varied. The move to agriculture increased the size of human populations, while making the lives of individual humans worse by almost any biological measure archaeologists can use. And then the trap snaps shut. Once a community starts farming, it can support more people on the same land than hunting and gathering can. More are born. The population increases. And an ever-increasing population cannot go back to a hunter-gatherer existence because there are now too many mouths to feed from wild food sources. The community is locked in forever, within generations. With larger populations, we need coordination. Specialists are needed for coordination. Specialists need to be paid. Compensation requires an exchange system. Systems of exchange need enforcement, and enforcement requires authority that sets out what people below it should do with their time. This is the direct line from the first planted seed to the modern conception of employment. Jobs were not created because people need structure or because work is inherently meaningful. They emerged because survival became dependent on participation in a system that no one chose alone and no one could leave alone. Progress did not rob the freedom that was 99% of human life. It was traded away quietly before anybody knew what they were missing. This is the thought people are likely to carry away after they've sat with all this for a while. The life you are weary of is not the natural state of man. This is not what your biology was built for, not what your nervous system expects, not what your body and mind have been prepared for by 300,000 years of human experience. This constant scheduling, this guilt about resting, this need to justify your existence with measurable productivity, none of that is ancient. None of that is part of what humans are, essentially. It's a system created 10,000 years ago out of agricultural necessity, honed through centuries of industrialization, and handed down to you as if it's simply the way things have always been. Your ancestors woke up free. Not free in the abstract, philosophical sense, but free in the practical, concrete sense, in the sense that really makes a difference to daily experience. It was free to rest without it meaning something was wrong. Free to spend hours creating something beautiful, no need to justify. Free to sit with people they loved for no productive reason, and that be enough. The tire that doesn't leave after a sleep. The sense of being busy all the time, but never quite fulfilled. That nagging feeling that real life is just out of reach, just beyond the next item on a to-do list that's growing faster than it's shrinking. That feeling is not a failure on your part. It cannot be solved by a better productivity system. This is your biology registering a gap between the life for which it was built and the life it is actually being asked to live. Ancient humans didn't spend their lives trying to get enough time, enough rest, and enough freedom to feel human at last. That's just where they began. And somewhere between the seed that was first planted and all that followed, we forgot that it was ever an option at all.